Hi, welcome back to our second segment of Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Judy Nathans.
And I'm Robert Winters.
And we are going to continue our scrapping along, pardon the metaphor.
Right. During our first exciting half hour, we talked a lot about recycling and
food recovery,
composting, and certainly we have a lot of things on the horizon. There's one neighborhood, one of the 5 rubbish collection routes has
call it rubbish. How quaint.
I don't know what the right word is anymore.
Trash and recycling.
But there are 5 days of the week. There are 5.
Right.
I'm on Wednesday, I think.
On Friday.
Right. So I think it's just the
Monday.
one up in the northwest
route.
part of the Monday route. Actually has full-blown organic
curbside compost pickup.
Organics collection, right? And where does it all go, right?
Well, Save That Stuff picks it up.
So Save That Stuff.
And it's been going to this place, I think, Brickends in Saugus.
Yeah, and so some of you who was looking at the Boston Globe over the weekend, you might have seen an article. Actually, what's the headline say?
We have a,
but the print version.
It's
just
what
a mess.
Which is the print version.
Right, but the article here, we'll just sort of show you here was, so Clover, which is, they must have, I know there are several Clover.
Oh, they're opening everywhere.
Certainly
Longwood area just opened one. There's a few in Cambridge, or at least 4. There's one in Brookline Village, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's sort of an alarming, for those of us who feel really good about the fact that we're doing recycling programs and promoting organics collections, both at home as well as in businesses and at the universities, to see an article that's headlined "Why Your Clover Food Scraps Might Be Headed for the," which is not necessarily definitively saying it is or it isn't.
Right.
But it basically the article highlights some of the sort of the annoying realities about how organics collection really works.
Right. And I mean, I always commended Clover for having front of the house sorting, which is what they did. And they served, they had bioplastic clear cups, they had utensils that were the cornstarchy things, and then they had their compostable ware, and supposedly all put in the same place.
Now, MIT, where I work,
they use...
very typically, whenever they have a big event, they always have compostable utensils and the degradable cups and whatever.
Really? They use the clear plastic cups?
I think they do, but it may not be universal. But I have to say, I've always been a little suspicious about these things.
Whether they can biodegrade.
Well, granted, this is not a proper controlled experiment, but I actually took some of those
put them in your
plastic wares, and I tried to see if I could even get a hint of them breaking down, and you never saw.
The paper you can. I compare it to eggshell carton type paper, and a lot of people serve in that kind of thing, but you cannot do that, and you need a very high heat anaerobic system to even break down, and even then the plastics are taken out.
So aerobic is with oxygen, and for those who are not scientific, anaerobic without oxygen.
Thank you. All right, but
a home composting arrangement is something you want to be aerobic. It'll stink if it's not.
And you really shouldn't be putting in those kind of materials.
Right, but
newspaper though. So maybe if it's like an egg, I used to put egg carton. I'd rip it up and put that in because that's good for it.
Sure.
But anything else that's, even if it says compostable, you should not be putting that in your backyard.
Right. But the truth is that this compostable ware, if you actually were to put it into a home compost bin, it wouldn't break down at all.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You can't put that in there.
So, and now the question was, so we certainly were led to believe, and maybe it can still be the case, that these supposedly compostable utensils
can be broken down more,
in an appropriate composting arrangement, would actually be digested and actually brought back down to nature.
But the one that was in the photo there, that is not anaerobic digestion. That is basically a large field that turns it over. Anaerobic digestion does rely on heat, but I've learned since then there's a low solid AD and then there's high solid, and apparently what we're dealing with, at least say, is low solids. So it cannot tolerate some of these materials.
I'll tell you another reason I had misgivings about when I first saw compostable ware, compostable utensils, is that if you were to take a polystyrene, well, maybe not polystyrene, but if you took a lot of plasticware and then the compostable plasticware and you put them side by side, they would actually be the same color.
Well, if you look, one is duller,
carefully,
one is shiny.
I'm saying only because
And you can crack the other one.
Right, but the average person isn't going to make the distinction.
Even more so, those cups that are clear look like number one peat.
Yeah, so they want to throw it in recycling.
And that's not good for the recycling.
Yeah, so on the one hand, if you are actually going to create a recycling stream of plastics 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. That's actually going to be remanufactured into other hard goods.
Right.
You don't want that to be
you can't
compostable
or biodegradable, or whatever it says on it.
So you don't want compostable plastics in your non-compostable plastic, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So apparently what's happening is some of these composting operations associated with clover, and I'm sure others, we shouldn't be
there's really so few. I think Life Alive might compost.
Right.
I think Charlie's Kitchen, actually. I'd like to look into that. They've been doing it for a long time.
They were doing it.
But that's also a sit-down restaurant where it's not a big takeout thing. So I think that that's really obviously would be the best solution, right?
Yeah.
If we were not
and
takeout society.
Harvard at the cafeterias, they do this as well. But the thing is,
they do have compostable ware at Harvard, and
but when I as teaching in the Harvard summer school, I get to go over to Memorial Hall and I get 10 free lunches during summer school.
Okay, let's forget that. But so where did you put your stuff?
I'm not forgetting it. I'm loving it.
So what did they serve it in?
You get metal forks and knives.
So you got real
trays, real stuff,
reusable dinnerware.
When you, if anything that isn't eaten, actually goes up on the tray, and then the kitchen staff, actually, not the kitchen staff, but the back end staff. They actually, scrape it off, put it out here, and then it's actually.
So that might be what's happening all over Harvard now. They're using reusable stuff, because I have not been there a long time.
So if you actually have what is clear food product and paper products or whatever, that's clearly compostable, and it's not particularly
and the Monday trash route, the pickup, is supposed to be just food scraps and stuff, which does include, by the way, meat products and things that you normally could not put in your backyard composter. So. If you have the ability to use that, you should be taking advantage of it.
Right. But the thing is
the
that
bigger problem is restaurants.
Right. Right. So people,
take out stuff.
Something like Harvard is all very centralized. You can
very
handle
controlled.
things. It's very controlled.
They have Rob Gogan too, which is a lot to do with him.
Head of the recycling for Harvard University. Now, so the great wish is that you want to have all these restaurants that are doing a lot of business. You want them. You'd love to see all that organic material. Well, first off,
a lot of them are doing it. I think Henry is. A lot of those places are doing it in the back of the house, not for the customer, especially if you're sitting down eating. They have been composting because it actually helps them. Yeah. It avoids a lot of trash
that's always was the biggest sales pitch that some people we knew who were in recycling would say to vendors. A lot of people didn't realize that you could save money, and people were saying, "Really? Oh, wow! Well, tell me how." Right?
Yeah. But now there is a waste ban. Again, it has to be enforced. But so big restaurants and supermarkets, hospitals, they've been on board. Even flower stores have been. So it's coming down to the smaller mom and pops, the smaller restaurants, and us.
I would like to believe that households can control what goes in. Well, as well,
well, that is easier to do. Right.
It's easy to do, but certainly, we've all seen recycling bins with
Styrofoam.
all the wrong stuff in there. So people aren't so great about it, but I think there seems to be a little bit more kind of buy-in for the people who are participating with the organics collection. So
because either they're participating or they're not.
Right.
Because a lot of them aren't.
Right.
You can't change.
I've always had a little bit of a prejudice about this. I didn't want to have everybody. Maybe it's sort of a slightly elitist view. Yeah. So that if you really were going to do everything all wrong, I would say, well, why don't you hold off and don't just do it just yet, right? Whereas a lot of people would say, no, we got to get everybody on board.
In this one, because of the problem we are finding out that the compostables you can't put that in, and also something about polystyrene and all this stuff from our I don't even want to get into the details, but it's like we rushed out this program because we wanted to do the right thing, but we're sort of ahead of ourselves. Just a lot of
people aren't so aware what is the right thing. Some people
pay as you throw would have been personally, which
might have been.
Brookline just passed it, would have been nicer to do, which you have to pay or just only limit what you could put out for trash, so it encourage recycling and then do the composting. But we're doing it backwards. We're doing the composting
Right.
first, and then they say we're going to do pay as you throw. But frankly, I think that would have been an easier way to do it, especially when they said you had to have trash in
Sure.
cans or member barrels and not put it
Yeah.
out anymore.
Yeah.
That was the perfect time to introduce it, but it was a very political thing. People didn't want it. We have
Right.
multi-use houses, so we are, and now people are clamoring, when is it going to start in my neighborhood?
Right.
But we've got to deal with these other issues, folks.
It may happen in my neighborhood, Mid-Cambridge, at some point, but we also,
Well,
we continue to do
well, wait a minute. Does it
composting
go?
on site.
Where's the Tuesday route? Is that next to the Monday route?
I think I always thought Monday was up in the
Where's
northwest.
West Cambridge? Where is the rich part of Cambridge?
I think that's Tuesday.
That's where it's
And then
going
we
to
swing
happen.
to Mid-Cambridge.
That's probably why they started Monday.
And then,
Yeah.
what's
I'll
it?
be last Friday.
Is Thursday up
The
at East
port
Cambridge?
and over
then
here,
next
yeah,
Friday.
that'll be last,
Yeah.
because that'll be the hardest, I think,
Right.
to educate.
So
I
you're
mean,
gonna
I'm
walk
not
your way
making an
through.
elitist statement, but let's face it.
Yeah, well, I use the word elitism, but the
I
truth is
know.
that those of us who were actively
Educated?
involved in the volunteer program, which
Yeah.
preceded curbside collection
Right.
back then,
25,
when
30
people
years,
would bring
yeah.
in wine bottles because we knew where the glass was going.
Right.
They did not want things like
Oh,
lead.
they had the little metal things,
So
and having to
we'd
get
ha-
rid
we
of
had
that.
little- I still
Oh,
have
you're
some
right.
little knives, so we'd have to cut.
A lot of
we'd
people
cut our
got
hands
injured,
to-
yes.
We injured ourselves. But the thing is that we were very aware about
Yeah.
prepping materials
Right.
and doing everything exactly
Right.
right because the end markets required it.
That's right. And
So
now
many of
it's
us
a
who
little-
went through that, we
Yeah.
still have that kind of built into us.
That's true.
So we just that's how we are, right?
Yeah.
I actually remember taking all the like leaded stuff from the tops, and I brought it to a place in Chelsea, and the guy gave me a big bunch of money for it. It was great.
Oh, the lead, you mean
Yeah.
aluminum? Was it
Uh,
lead too?
It was So, but the various metals. There was aluminum ones,
Well,
but then there were the heavy lead ones.
Well, I had with the kids at the Cambridge Port School, with the help of the cap, we rolled our aluminum foil to this giant ball. It actually made it
Right.
into the Chronicle, and I took it to the scrap, and we got $5 for it.
$5 for it.
But it was to try to say, because I helped start that whole diversion
at
program
places
at
I
our
worked,
school.
when I worked over at
Yeah.
Boston University for a time, I set up a white ledger paper recycling, and we
yeah.
actually got real money for it.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, businesses have actually been behind a lot of recycling because it's
Yeah.
their bottom line. They're
Yeah.
paying for that
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
When you don't pay for it, the city's you don't think about it.
Right.
That's why I think
So-
pay as you throw would work.
Yeah,
Because
well, we're definitely in a new era now
should.
where it's
Oh,
it's all
gosh,
about
yeah.
the volume, right?
Well-
So we have zero sort systems. They gave us all big toters, and it was all about getting
volume,
maximum
but
capture.
yeah, right.
But and I'm not saying that we don't have the best end markets at the end, but I've always just
Yeah.
been a little suspicious to make I always want to make sure. And I'll tell you another thing. When we were on the recycling advisory committee back, we used to meet at Public Works.
Oh, that was when it was in the evening.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
remember pressing one of the industry guys about it. I said, well, could you
Yeah.
just tell us where the glass is going or the
Yeah, but
plastic
that's
is?
so long ago, Robert.
I know, but he was evasive.
I know,
And
he
then
didn't
the
know.
Public Works commissioner said,
Yeah.
you better start treating my people
Yeah.
right,
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, I think people should ask
Definitely
those
there's markets
questions.
because they wouldn't be continuing the business if there wasn't.
Right.
They're not throwing it out. There is a
Right.
certain amount of residue that they're allowed to do in their contracts
Right.
and stuff, and that's
So-
understandable.
So we're having little
Yeah.
growing pains here right now.
Right.
So the Boston Globe article about clover and the food here said
Right.
they're doing, they're really doing the right thing, trying to promote
Right.
organics collections. But the thing is, it's not a
easy.
given. And
Right.
even now, I think I don't know exactly where we stand, but in terms
Yeah.
of the movement toward, when will City of Cambridge start expanding to other days collection routes? Right.
They claim
couple
September
years.
2017.
Right. But the thing is that that's to some
That's a-
degree limited
yeah.
by the ability to
Exactly.
actually have a place to bring it.
Right.
And I don't know that those locations exist.
Well, no, but you see, that's the whole point of, say, that stuff, building this smaller
Yeah,
AD,
anaerobic
is that
digestion.
it's going to get it down to such a small amount, they then send it out, I think it's Lawrence or Lowell. So
Right.
it is actually going in the right direction there, if it's just
Okay.
food scraps.
Yeah, if it's
But
just food
the
scraps.
issue is, with this ordinance that's supposed to be coming on board in late October, with it banning all rigid plastics in food service stuff, it's going to create problems because you can't tell people we'll use compostable ware because that's better.
Right.
But it's
Right, I think
very
this is-
nebulous whether it gets, so maybe it takes one less year to biodegrade in a landfill.
Certainly my personal gripe,
Yeah.
perhaps one of your personal
Yes.
gripes too,
Yes.
is that, our elected officials often, if, you say,
sounds great.
here's a wonderful thing,
It's
ban
inspirational.
polystyrene, it's
Let's do it,
wonderful, we're
yeah.
progressive, we're
Yeah. Meanwhile,
disruptors,
yeah.
we're going to do this, we're going to say,
Right.
and then they didn't even
They
read
didn't
the
look at the
document.
technology. You have to.
Yeah.
Straws are included in that, and
I know.
tops.
I know.
Start looking at the stuff you get, folks, and see
Right.
what is.
Yeah. So this is not a
Right.
message from
No.
a couple of old recycling folks here to not do the right thing.
No,
You
it's just you got
should
to
ask
keep up with
questions.
technology. Ask questions.
Yeah, and elected officials should ask questions too. They
Right.
should think about the consequences of what they do. And,
Right. And
whether,
consult
in
with the
fact,
people most affected, which are businesses,
Right.
restaurants,
Yeah.
and not just whatever. So this kind of leads into, if you want to talk about the transportation, I don't know, the whole driverless thing.
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. I mean, it's another thing. You said
Yeah.
like, actually, let me, just to
Okay.
preface things just a little
All
bit
right.
here. You should always be just a little bit cautious when somebody
Yes.
says, "Well, this is the wave of the future."
Right.
And just to say that is that there was a time when elevated highways were viewed as the future. That was modern. Right?
Oh,
No
right.
more, having to fight with cars in the street. We're going to elevate them all up there, right? And then 40 years later or so, they were doing the big dig in order to take down elevated highways.
Right.
There was a time when there were planners in Cambridge actually were perfectly okay with the idea of building the inner belt.
Oh my
which would
gosh, yeah, we were just talking about that. It would have
cut
been a
right through Cambridge.
disaster. Like,
Right. So, and I'm only saying that not
Yeah.
to be a downer, but to say that there's a lot of precedent for the next big thing being something everybody sort of jumped on top of, but they didn't think it through, and then a decade or so later, or in that case, several decades later,
Yes.
people said this is exactly the wrong thing to have done.
Right, and then who brought it up? Was it at the meeting last week about the push for the suburbs in when was that, the 60s, and to build along there, and
Right.
then all the money that went from the federal government into
Yeah.
highways, and now
Yeah.
people are moving to the cities, and what have we neglected? Public transportation.
Right. So, but that was considered the ideal, wasn't it? That's
exactly.
the American dream.
Right, and now
very few
all
people
those companies along 128
Yep.
are.
Yeah.
It probably will go back again, but oh my gosh,
Right.
I don't know.
And now,
with the robotic car.
And we were at a conference just a few weeks ago.
Yes.
Where they talked about driverless vehicles and robotic cars, and
Yes.
and there were some pretty expert people at that conference.
Absolutely.
And they made it quite clear that one byproduct, one likely byproduct
Yes.
of having driverless vehicles is that there will be more vehicles on the road, not less. And that
But they won't be living in the city. They're going to drive themselves out, which is what this article says. Did you read that?
People will actually start going
They'll be
back
dropped
to the
off.
suburbs, and then the driverless
Yeah.
cars would come and pick them up and take them.
Right.
They could have a few drinks on the way because they don't have to worry about driving.
Well, except
Come into town, fly, So anyway, not that I'm trying to be too much of a downer about the idea about driverless vehicles, but that's just another example of something where everybody's saying,
Right.
"Oh, it's the next big thing," and maybe it will be, maybe it won't be.
how about less cars and more public transportation, and maybe places where there's no cars?
At that conference we were at,
Yeah.
somebody from the
Yeah.
city of Cambridge, two people from the city of Cambridge pointed out that one byproduct of promoting driverless car technology is that it might be the death knell for public transportation. All right.
Well, that is true. Somebody pointed that out?
I think Suzanne Rasmussen said something which I thought was particularly, from environmental planning and transportation planning for the city of Cambridge. And Joe Barr, who's the traffic director,
Right.
was
That's
pretty
true.
clear, I think, about this. So.
Well, this is interesting.
So anyway, there was some recent days. There's been some.
Yeah.
I think some people are still a little intrigued by it. Some people see a little comic side to it. Of course, the fact that somebody driving the first fatality.
Well, he was a prototype. I mean, he had
driving a prototype.
Well, but also he was some bigwig
car.
that was almost testing it out. But he was. I have not heard this lately that he was watching a movie.
Right. The technology
should have
is
had his
not
hands.
perfected.
Right.
But here's just a few particular. These are things that were in the Globe in recent days.
All right. This was in the business section just yesterday.
Right?
Yeah.
Just sort of pointing out, this is actually seen out in Devens, which used to be called Fort Devens.
And I guess this is where they're going to be testing stuff out, huh?
Well, at least I think that's what he would like. He's pitching, this is somebody, I forget his name here, but he's pitching the idea.
Thatcher Keyser.
Right, of using the relatively deserted roads as a sort of a testing area for...
Which is fine, deserted roads, but how about testing them in Boston? That was one of the comments, by the way, I read.
Right. Well, they do make the point here is that we've got we're like the high tech capital, and we have like into robotics. We have some of the best researchers.
But we have some of the oldest streets.
You know,
but that are just.
We also, without, as the article says, without legislation, driverless vehicles.
They can't be tested on mass roads, which is interesting. I didn't know that. I mean, I don't know about other states, but
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, just sort of point that out. There was another article. I think it was a couple weeks earlier too.
Oh, about the woman that wrote. No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. Okay.
Right. But but anyway, just to sort of point out that there's well, the point I was trying to make here is that we get very infatuated with the next big thing,
right?
And then it's not necessarily going to be sort of the future, right? You know, So
there's just so many issues related to it, and I think the problem I'm having with it, which is the technology is going right ahead. You've got Audi, you've got all the car companies are putting all their money into this, but the municipalities and especially older cities are behind that. I mean, they're not there yet. So it's trying to meet these two things. I mean,
I think it's probably now over the next few years, it's sort of a good time for people to start thinking about some of the ups and downs of some of these things.
Well, then they are. But I think the average person...
I mean, what does it actually mean in terms of... for example, it seems to me that if you had a fair amount of driverless vehicles, I'm not in the slightest way convinced that you can have a compatible mix of driven vehicles and driverless vehicles.
Right. I just don't see how it would work.
So it would not be an impossible scenario to have certain roads say, well, we've decided we cannot allow anything but driverless vehicles on these particular roads.
That I could sort of see. It's like you have certain designated, sort
of arterials for driverless vehicles.
Do you remember the
So they're almost like trackless trains in a way with lots and lots of cars.
Do you remember the example, the woman from San Francisco that's big on I forget what her title was, it's on here. Lauren Isaac, manager of sustainable transportation for some big company. And she said that the car the sensor couldn't detect whether the guy on the bicycle who was in the clips that was moving his feet constantly to stay in his bicycle clips was moving, so the car didn't move, and then a bicyclist didn't want to move because didn't know what the car was doing.
Whereas a human being could exercise actual judgment. Now maybe we'll get to the point where these driverless vehicles... I know,
but that was a great example of...
We're not there.
We're not there. Just like with the sensors on that Tesla car, seeing white.
Right, but I've heard there was one city councilor, not long ago, I won't name names, who actually said, well, within 10 years, there won't be any they'll all be driverless vehicles, and that's what the future is.
The one that has the hover?
No. So.
All right. Well, also no cars at all. Which actually, if it was.
Well, it was being used because there was something of a plan to actually do a little bit more centralized parking in around a place like Central Square. So
that would be fine by me.
Right. So there's a proposal maybe to reconfigure the Green Street garage.
Oh, I remember hearing this. Yeah, and the answer to that was let's just not have any.
Right. They say, well, you're totally crazy because after all, there won't be any need for parking because.
But where are those driverless cars going to park?
Exactly.
Well, actually, in that one scenario that we heard, they're going to drive 15 miles out to some bigger parking lot, which means that.
But it'd be like the asteroid.
That's energy that's being used.
Right. They'll just be driverless vehicles cycling around the city.
Hello.
Right. Yeah.
And they didn't even mention whether they're going to be hybrids. Right. That was the other thing, which is interesting.
But I think the thing it kind of infuriated me, quite honestly, was that we had local elected officials using this pretend future, which may or may not be true.
There was only one elected official.
No, there was
wait, are you talking about at the city council meeting or at this other meeting?
City council meeting.
Oh, okay.
Using this as a strong argument for why, in fact, we shouldn't even be talking about reconfiguring the Green Street garage.
Oh. Yeah.
Now, the reason for reconfiguring the Green Street garage has...
Because it needs...
Well, I mean, it has to do with, the fact is
It's
that...
only 2 stories, right?
Well, I forget
Well, it's
exactly
not
how,
very tall.
but it could be better. Could be,
Well, they could add more spaces to it.
Right. But, there you had elected officials basically saying, well, don't even think about that because in 5 years you're all going to be...
But it wasn't all of them.
I know.
Everyone has their opinion.
No, it's only 2 out of 9. But the thing is that, but they're going to use it as an argument.
I know, but when push comes to shove, I think people are going to say...
But I can imagine saying back in 1940s or 50s and somebody saying, well, I think we really need to do something more about traffic safety. And then somebody saying, no, we don't need to because pretty soon all the roads are going to be elevated highways, so we don't have to worry about that now.
Or pretty soon there's not going to be any cars,
Right.
which...
And then some years later, we said, well, I'm sorry, but we do have to worry about such things.
I wouldn't mind not having cars in certain parts of the city. I think that's,
I'm okay with that. Actually, my personal
Well, you never
vision...
move your cars.
Well, I don't, but the thing is, I actually love the idea of having sort of bicycle, pedestrian priority streets.
Yeah.
And have that be sort of the rule. And,
I like that.
That's my ultimate traffic
Well,
calming
young people
rule.
aren't buying cars and they're not using cars, so
I
that's
want,
fine.
other than a few
Sharing
major
economy,
arterials, I want every road in Cambridge to be a WUNRF, a shared street, and nobody can drive fast because, there's a kid with a swing set in the middle of, not in the middle of the road.
Not in the middle of the road, right.
But, just to have it, I like a little bit of controlled chaos. I think it actually calms all the streets, so.
We're almost at the end here. Anything important we're supposed to announce? I guess you can just go to Robert's website, Cambridge Civic Journal, rwinters.com. I'm Judy Nathans. You can always find me on Facebook or send me a message if you want to know more about food recovery or anything. Just don't be mean. And what else?
Right. And if you want to find me, you'll just have to register
Robert's
for my
all over the
mathematics
place.
classes
You just
MIT.
Google Robert Winters and a million hits are going to come out.
So, anyway, until next week. I think we'll be back next week.
Yeah, next week the 12th.
We may take off sometime in the summer.
Right, but we'll let you know.
Anyway, until then, see you later.
Bye. That's good.